You're the one helping my daughter.
Get her a donor, or get ready to tell me my daughter is dead. Those were the first words Billionaire CEO Callum Renshaw screamed into the trauma room as surgeons fought to keep his 10-year-old daughter alive. His voice cracked with the kind of fear money could never hide, echoing down the white hallway of St. Gabriel's Medical Center. Alarms blared, doctors moved fast. A nurse sprinted past with a fresh crash cart. Yet no one stepped forward when the intercom announcement came again. O-negative blood is urgently needed. Pediatric emergency. All compatible donors report immediately. And still, the hallway stayed frozen. Because O-negative is rare. Less than 7% of Americans have it. And from the looks exchanged between doctors, nurses, and families in the waiting room, it was clear no one here did. Not today. Not now. Not when a child was bleeding out behind the glass. Callum pressed his hands against the window of the operating room, his reflection trembling. For a man who owned downtown skyscrapers and controlled entire markets with a single meeting, this was the first time in his life he could not buy a solution. Despite having all the money in his accounts, the influence he had built, and the power he believed made him untouchable, he could not buy a solution. His daughter, Ariel, lay small and pale on the table. Tubes ran from her arms. Monitors screamed warnings he didn't understand. Nurses whispered to each other, trying to hide the truth he already sensed. She was running out of time. A doctor approached him carefully. "We need a donor within the hour, or we lose her." Callum nodded, but inside he shattered. Because earlier that day, he had mocked someone. Someone he should never have mocked. A young black waitress with the brightest smile in the room and the calmest eyes he had ever avoided meeting. A woman he dismissed with a joke about knowing her place. A woman he treated like background noise, insignificant, unworthy. He had never once imagined that the person he insulted would soon hold the one thing he desperately needed, a compatible heartbeat. And then the hospital doors slid open. A woman walked in, wearing simple jeans, a clean work shirt, and a name tag from the upscale restaurant he had dined at that morning. Her curls framed her face, her skin glowed under the fluorescent lights, and her presence shifted the entire air around the lobby. Zahara Blythe, the waitress he mocked, the one he humiliated. She stopped mid-stride as the intercom repeated its plea. O-negative urgently needed. She blinked. Then she whispered something so soft the security guard barely heard it. "I'm O-negative." And the world tilted. Before we go deeper into this unbelievable true-to-life story, take a breath and stay with me. This one will challenge what you think you know about people, about dignity, and about the way life brings us face to face with our own reflection. If you want more stories that reveal the truth behind human courage, hit like and subscribe, but only if you feel it in your chest right now. Now, breathe in, because this is the moment everything begins to change. 8 hours earlier, the sun had just started to rise over Los Angeles, casting a golden glow over the glass towers of downtown. It was a Wednesday morning like any other in the city, fast, loud, and a little bit too bright. Zahara Blythe stood behind the polished wood counter of Luma, one of the most expensive rooftop restaurants in the city. The staff was already buzzing. Fresh linen napkins were being folded, wine glasses checked for smudges. Everything had to be perfect. Luma didn't just serve food, it served power. Every day, deals worth millions were sealed between sips of espresso and truffle omelets. Zahara adjusted her name tag, tied her apron tight, and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. She'd worked here for 2 years, starting as a busser before being promoted to front server. Her smile was the kind people remembered, genuine, warm, disarming. But today, it was strained. She hadn't slept much. Her mom's arthritis had flared up again last night, and the two of them had spent hours trying to get the pain under control. But Zahara showed up anyway. She always did. Because the tips were good, because rent wasn't cheap, because she had dreams that didn't fit inside a paycheck. At 7:45 a.m. sharp, the elevator doors opened. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Callum Renshaw walked in with 3 executives trailing behind him. Everyone knew who he was. The billionaire CEO of Renshaw Holdings. Private jets, luxury resorts, tech patents, real estate empires. The man had more money than most small countries. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, no tie, and a watch worth more than Zahara made in 6 months. His eyes scanned the room like he owned it, which technically he did. Renshaw Holdings had partial ownership of the building. Zahara straightened her back, smoothed her apron, and stepped forward with her usual poise. "Good morning, gentlemen. Table for 4?" Callum glanced at her, didn't respond, and then turned to one of his men. You'd think with these prices, they'd have hostesses who knew how to speak properly. The words hit her like a slap, but she didn't flinch. "Of course, sir." "Right this way," she said, voice calm and professional. They followed her to the corner table, one of the best spots with a view of the skyline. She handed out menus, poured water, and stood ready. Callum looked her up and down. "What's your name?" "Zahara. Zahara Blythe." "Zahara? That's unique," he smirked. "Not a stage name or something?" "No, sir. It's my real name." He laughed under his breath, then muttered to his colleague, "Can't even spell Sarah right anymore." The men chuckled. Zahara said nothing. She'd heard worse, but that didn't make it easier. He ordered without looking at the menu. Lobster Benedict, extra hot coffee, no cream, no sugar. She repeated the order back perfectly, nodded, and left the table. Her hands shook slightly as she entered it into the system. Not because she was intimidated, because it still amazed her how casually people like Callum Renshaw could strip someone's dignity away with a joke. Half an hour later, the food came out. Zahara carried the tray with grace and set each plate down with care. Before she could walk away, Callum flagged her. "Hey, waitress, Zahara, right?" "Yes, sir." "You missed a fingerprint on the water glass. Sloppy." He held it up between 2 fingers like it was contaminated. "Apologies, sir. I'll bring a new one." She replaced it without a word. Callum didn't say thank you. As she walked away, she overheard him laughing again. She's got the smile, I'll give her that. Probably hired for it. Zahara stepped into the back hallway and leaned against the wall for a breath. Her heart ached, not because his words mattered, but because this still happened. In 2025. In public. In a place with cameras and contracts and HR manuals. But she wasn't going to cry. She had dealt with men like him before. She would again. What Zahara didn't know, what no one could have guessed, was that the man who just mocked her would soon be begging for her help. Not in a restaurant, not in a boardroom, in a hospital, where only one kind of power mattered, and she would be the only one holding it. The shift ended at 3 p.m., and Zahara left the rooftop restaurant with the kind of exhaustion that sank deep into her bones. The Los Angeles heat had risen into the high 80s, and the sun bounced off every glass surface, making the city look like it was on fire. But Zahara didn't notice the heat. Her mind was still replaying every word from that morning. Can't even spell Sarah right anymore. She tried to brush it off like she always did, but this time it stuck. She boarded the number 14 bus on Sunset Boulevard, heading east. The air inside was stale and heavy with sweat, but she found an empty seat near the back and collapsed into it, gripping the metal pole like it might keep her upright. The bus jolted forward, and Zahara watched the city blur past the windows. Every face she passed on the street felt like it was looking through her, or worse, down at her. She knew that feeling too well. She had grown up with it. When she was 11, her mother enrolled her in a charter school in Brentwood, a mostly white neighborhood where parents drove Teslas and donated buildings in exchange for scholarships. Zahara had been the only black girl in her grade. She still remembered how it felt to walk through those hallways with her braids tied back tight and her uniform ironed perfectly, only to be asked by teachers if she was in the wrong building. Her name had always been a conversation starter. sometimes kind, more often not. Zahara? That's a name. It's from the Bible. It means flowering, she would say. But most of the time, people didn't want the meaning. They just wanted to know why she didn't have a normal name. One teacher had even called her Zuhaira on purpose, every single day for a semester, even after she corrected him. She learned not to correct people. She learned to smile, even when it hurt. That smile had become her armor. But even armor cracks. When Zahara got off the bus and turned the corner to her apartment building, her shoulders were tight. The cracked sidewalk was familiar. The graffiti on the alley wall hadn't changed. This was home, but it was also a reminder that no matter how hard she worked, she was still climbing out of something generations deep. She unlocked the front door of the small two-bedroom unit she shared with her mother. The living room was quiet. A fan whirred in the corner. A stack of medical bills sat unopened on the counter, as they always did. "Ma?" she called out gently. "In the kitchen, baby," her mother replied, her voice soft but strong. Zahara dropped her bag by the door and walked in. Her mom stood by the sink, washing a few dishes, her movements slow and careful. The arthritis was worse in the mornings, but she never complained. "You look tired," her mom said, giving her a knowing look. Zahara forced a smile. "Long day. Rich people, you know." Her mom raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" Zahara sighed and leaned against the counter. "Just another guy thinking the world owes him something. Said some things. I let it go." Her mother wiped her hands and turned to face her. "Letting it go doesn't mean it didn't hurt." Zahara swallowed. "I know." There was a long pause. "Do you remember what I used to tell you when those girls at school made fun of your skin?" her mom asked. Zahara nodded. "That my skin was gold, not dirt. That they couldn't see the light because they were too busy looking at their own shadows." Her mom smiled, just a little. "And were they right?" "No," Zahara said, shaking her head. "They were scared of what they didn't understand." "Exactly." Zahara looked at her mother then, really looked. At the lines around her eyes, at the strength in her softness. Her mother had cleaned homes for over 2 decades and still managed to raise a daughter who walked into every room with her head high, even when the world tried to push it down. "I think I need to take a nap before my night shift," Zahara said. "Go lie down. I'll wake you if dinner gets interesting." Zahara kissed her mother on the cheek and walked to her room. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles above her. But sleep didn't come easy. Not when the weight of the day pressed into her chest like a hand that wouldn't lift. And not when she had no idea that in just a few hours, everything she believed about who she was and what she was capable of would be tested in a way no one saw coming. It happened just after 5 p.m., right in the heart of downtown Los Angeles. The traffic was brutal, the kind that turned a 10-minute drive into 45. Horns blared, sirens echoed somewhere in the distance. The sky had darkened slightly, a layer of haze casting everything in a dull orange glow. Callum Renshaw sat in the back of his armored black SUV, scrolling through his phone. His daughter, Ariel, was seated beside him, strapped in with her seatbelt, swinging her legs and humming a tune only she seemed to understand. She had just finished ballet practice, her bag tossed carelessly on the floor, pink slippers sticking out. "Did you watch me, Daddy?" she asked, looking up at him with eyes that matched her mother's. Callum didn't look up from his phone. He replied, distracted. "No, you didn't," she said, scrunching her nose. "You were on your phone the whole time." He looked at her then and forced a smile. "Next time, I promise." Ariel didn't argue. She just turned her face to the window and kept humming. Up front, the driver, Callum's personal chauffeur, a man named Trent, drummed his fingers on the steering wheel impatiently. He had been on the clock since early morning and was clearly itching to call it a day. What Callum didn't know, what no one had checked, was that Trent had stopped for a drink at lunch. 1 bourbon turned into 3. His tolerance wasn't what it used to be, and now, on the congested streets of LA, he was barely holding it together. As they pulled up to an intersection near Olympic Boulevard, the light turned yellow, then red. But Trent didn't stop. He gunned the SUV forward. The screech of brakes came from the left. A delivery truck, big, fast, and already halfway through the intersection, hit the side of the SUV with a sickening crunch of metal. The force sent the vehicle spinning. Glass shattered. Tires screamed. Ariel's tiny body slammed sideways, her seatbelt snapping hard against her chest. The SUV crashed into a pole, jolting everyone forward. Inside the cabin, it went eerily silent. Then Ariel screamed. Callum's head had hit the side window. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. Disoriented, he reached for his daughter. "Ariel? I can't breathe," she gasped, her hand clutching her stomach. The rear door was jammed. A good Samaritan, a pedestrian who had witnessed the crash, ran up and yanked open the passenger side. Callum lifted Ariel in his arms, stumbling out into the street as sirens wailed in the distance. People crowded around, phones out, some filming. Others are calling 911. A woman handed Callum a towel for the blood on his face, but he ignored it. All he could see was Ariel's pale face, her lips starting to turn a shade too close to blue. "Stay with me, baby," he whispered, kneeling on the sidewalk. She blinked up at him, eyes glassy. "Hurts," she whispered. The paramedics arrived 3 minutes later. It felt like 3 years. They loaded her onto a stretcher. Her vital signs were unstable, blood pressure dropping. Internal bleeding suspected. The nearest trauma center was St. Gabriel's, less than 2 miles away. Callum climbed into the back of the ambulance, his hands shaking, watching as they inserted IVs and barked numbers at each other. "She's crashing," one of the medics shouted, "BP 80/40 and falling." They turned on the siren and floored it. Inside the trauma bay at St. Gabriel's, the ER team moved fast. Ariel was unresponsive by the time they arrived. The CT scan revealed the worst, a ruptured spleen, massive internal hemorrhage. Her blood volume was dropping too fast. She needed a transfusion, immediately. The surgeon on duty, Dr. Patel, called for blood. When the nurse read the chart, her face went pale. "She's O negative," she said. Dr. Patel exhaled sharply. "Of course she is." They checked the hospital supply. Empty. O negative was rare, a universal donor, but could only receive from the same type. And the trauma unit had already used the last unit earlier that day on a gunshot victim. They called 3 nearby hospitals. All were out. The blood bank coordinator paged overhead. Code red. O negative is urgently needed for a pediatric emergency. All compatible staff report immediately. But no one came. No one had it. Callum stood outside the glass, fists clenched, watching as they tried to keep his daughter alive. He had the best lawyers, the fastest jets, the most exclusive health plan. But none of it could create blood. His phone buzzed with texts and missed calls, but he didn't answer any of them. His entire world was bleeding out in front of him. And for the first time in his life, he had no idea how to fix it. Callum Renshaw stood still in the sterile hallway of St. Gabriel's Medical Center, his tailored shirt soaked through with sweat, his forehead still bleeding from the crash. But he didn't feel the pain, not in his body anyway. He felt it in his chest. Ariel was behind the glass. Her body was small, pale, and lifeless on a hospital bed too big for her. A dozen wires ran from her arms, her chest, and her fingers. Machines blinked and beeped, numbers ticking like a countdown clock. 2 nurses were pushing meds. A surgeon shouted for the trauma cart. Callum pressed his hand against the cold glass window, and for the first time in his career, no one was listening to him. He wasn't in a boardroom. He couldn't raise his voice and make someone jump. He couldn't throw money at the problem and make it disappear. And the problem wasn't a stock price or a missed quarterly target. It was his daughter, his only child, fighting to stay alive. He turned to the head nurse at the desk. "How long does she have?" Her face tightened. "That depends. If we get the blood in the next 45 minutes, she'll have a strong chance. After that," she didn't finish. Callum pulled out his phone and started making calls. First, his private doctor. No O negative. Next, his security team. Call everyone, anyone in my network. Find someone with O negative. Then his assistant. I don't care if they're in New York. Charter a jet. Tell them it's life or death. One by one, the calls came back. No one could help. Too far. Wrong blood type. Couldn't get there in time. He tried old friends from Harvard, business partners, even rivals he'd once humiliated in board takeovers. It didn't matter. All of them said the same thing. I wish I could help, man. I really do. But I'm not a match. He paced the floor like a caged animal. His shoes echoed on the tile. His hands couldn't stop shaking. Dr. Patel stepped into the hallway. We're stabilizing her vitals for now, but we need the transfusion soon. We've put out the call hospital-wide. We're checking staff records, walk-ins, everything. But O negative is rare. Callum nodded, but his jaw clenched. Rare. Everything about Ariel had been rare since the day she was born. The way she held his finger with all 5 of hers. The way she learned to read at 4. The way she asked questions he couldn't answer. She was his entire universe, and he had never once imagined that all his wealth could mean so little. "Can you take mine?" he asked. The nurse shook her head. "You're AB positive, Mr. Renshaw. It's not compatible. It would kill her." The word stabbed through him. Kill her. He walked back to the glass. Ariel twitched in her sleep, or maybe it was a reflex. One of the machines beeped a little louder. He couldn't tell what it meant. He was supposed to be the man with solutions, the man who saw 6 moves ahead, who turned problems into profit. But right now, Callum Renshaw couldn't do a damn thing. All he had was time that was running out. He leaned against the wall and slid down slowly until he was sitting on the cold floor, knees bent, hands on his face. This wasn't supposed to happen, not to people like him. He had gone to the best schools, hired the best minds, and married into the right family. He'd built an empire, crushed competition, created jobs, dominated industries, and now he was losing the only person who'd ever made him feel human. Ariel, the little girl who once put stickers on his briefcase just so he wouldn't forget to smile. He didn't hear the intercom at first. The words floated through the hallway like a lifeline wrapped in static. Code red. O negative blood is urgently needed. Pediatric trauma. All compatible donors, please report immediately to the donation center. Callum looked up. The nurse repeated the same phrase on the hospital PA. He stood. Someone. Anyone. The doors of the hospital remained closed. The hallway stayed still. Then his phone buzzed again. Not a donor, just another alert. His stock price had dropped 2% in the last hour. He stared at it for a long moment, then turned the screen off. None of it mattered. Not now. Because somewhere in this city, someone out there had the blood his daughter needed, and they had no idea they were the only thing standing between her and the end of everything. Zahara Blythe hadn't planned on going to the hospital that evening. In fact, she almost stayed home. After her nap, she'd woken up groggy and debated whether to visit her friend Shanice, who had been admitted to St. Gabriel's the night before with a bad case of appendicitis. Shanice had texted earlier, bored and annoyed, asking for snacks and company. Zahara didn't really have the energy. The morning's encounter with Callum Renshaw had drained something deeper than just physical strength. But she also knew Shanice hated hospitals, and friends showed up, even when it was inconvenient. So she pulled on a pair of clean jeans, slipped into her favorite sneakers, and tied her hair into a loose bun. Her mom handed her a paper bag with juice and crackers for Shanice. "Tell her I said to stop being dramatic," her mom teased as Zahara headed out. She took the number 14 again, transferring once, then walked the final block to the hospital entrance. The automatic doors whooshed open, and the sterile scent of antiseptic and overworked air conditioning hit her like a wave. The lobby was busier than she expected. Nurses moving fast, a woman sobbing quietly near the payphones, and 2 security guards talking in hushed voices by the front desk. Zahara approached the reception window. "I'm here to see Shanice Cole," she said. The receptionist tapped quickly. "Room 214B, surgical recovery. Take the elevator to the 2nd floor and make a right." Zahara thanked her and turned toward the hallway when the hospital intercom crackled overhead. Code red. O-negative blood is urgently needed. Pediatric trauma case. All compatible donors, please report to the donation center immediately. She stopped mid-step. Something in her chest pulled tight. She'd heard announcements like that before, but never this serious, never this urgent. There was tension in the nurse's voice, real fear. She hesitated, then turned back to the front desk. "Sorry, one more thing. Where's the donation center?" The receptionist looked up, surprised. "Ground floor. Past the cafeteria, make a left at the vending machines." Zahara nodded slowly. "Thank you." She didn't rush. She walked, because something told her this mattered. When she reached the blood donation center, there were already a few people there, hospital staff mostly, and a couple of nervous-looking visitors filling out forms. A nurse at the check-in counter looked up. "Are you here to donate?" she asked. Zahara nodded. "Yes, I'm O-negative." The nurse blinked, clearly startled. "You're sure?" "Absolutely. I donate a couple times a year. Red Cross has me in their system." The nurse's face softened with relief. "We really need it. Pediatric trauma. Little girl, maybe 10 years old. She's not going to make it without a transfusion." Zahara's breath caught. Her hands trembled, just slightly. Okay, she said. "Let's do it." The nurse handed her a clipboard with forms. Zahara filled them out quickly, her handwriting firm. A technician checked her vitals, took a tiny sample of blood, and scanned her ID. "You're clear," he said. "And your match is... Wow, this is good. You have one of the rarest antigen combinations we've seen. Your blood is almost universally clean for pediatrics, no rare antibodies." Zahara didn't really understand what that meant, but she understood this. A little girl needed what she had, and she wasn't about to walk away. A few minutes later, she was lying back on a padded recliner, her sleeve rolled up, a needle in her arm. The room buzzed around her, nurses preparing bags, machines humming softly, and the quiet rush of urgency underneath it all. She closed her eyes. Outside, in a hallway she hadn't passed, sat the man who made her feel small just hours earlier, the man who treated her name like a joke. He had no idea she was here, and she had no idea that the little girl whose life she was trying to save was his daughter. Callum Renshaw had been pacing the hospital corridor for nearly 20 minutes, his body stiff, his nerves stretched thin. The doctors had stabilized Ariel, for now, but without the transfusion, her condition would reverse in minutes. The weight in his chest grew heavier with every tick of the second hand on the wall clock. Still no donors, still no blood. Every time the intercom buzzed, he lifted his head, hoping to hear a different message. But it was always the same call, repeated, desperate, unanswered. Code red. O-negative blood is urgently needed for pediatric trauma. Immediate donor requested. He pressed his palms into his eyes, trying to push back the sting of helplessness. When he opened them, he caught a blur of movement near the hallway corner. A nurse walking fast. Behind her, someone following. Callum almost didn't look twice, but something about her made him pause. Jeans, white sneakers, a deep blue work shirt with rolled sleeves. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. She wasn't hospital staff. She wasn't a patient. And yet, there was something familiar about the way she walked. Confident, calm. He turned to get a better look, and his heart stopped. It was her. Zahara. The waitress from that morning. The one he'd made a joke out of. The one he'd brushed off like she didn't matter. She didn't notice him at first. She was focused on the nurse ahead of her, following instructions toward a small room near the donation center. But then she slowed, turned her head slightly. Their eyes met. She froze mid-step. So did he. For a few seconds, the world around them blurred. The sounds of the hospital, the beeping monitors, the rolling carts, the voices over the intercom faded into a strange, hollow silence. Zahara's eyes locked on his. No fear, no anger, just recognition. Callum opened his mouth, then closed it. He wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't used to this kind of silence, not in his world. Not from someone who had every reason to walk past him without a second glance. He took a step forward. "Zahara?" She didn't respond at first. Her eyes flicked to the ID badge clipped to his shirt. It read, Callum Renshaw, guardian of Ariel Renshaw. That name. Her gaze narrowed. Then, quietly, "Your daughter? She's the little girl?" Callum nodded, unable to speak. Zahara's jaw tightened. For a brief moment, Callum expected her to turn around and leave, walk right out the hospital doors. He wouldn't blame her, not after the way he treated her that morning. The name joke, the water glass, the way he had made her feel like she didn't belong in the world he moved through like a king. But she didn't leave. She didn't say anything cruel. She just looked at him with eyes that saw right through every expensive layer he'd ever worn. "I'm here to donate," she said simply. "They said she doesn't have much time." Callum swallowed hard. I didn't know. I didn't realize." "You don't have to say anything," she interrupted, her tone firm but not unkind. "I'm not doing this for you." She turned to follow the nurse again, but then paused just before disappearing into the blood collection room. "For the record," she added without turning around, "Zahara means light in Arabic. You joked about my name like it was something made up." Callum felt the heat rise to his face. I didn't mean." "But you did," she said, soft but sharp. "And that matters." Then she was gone. Callum stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding, the echo of her words ringing louder than any alarm ever had. He had come face to face with someone he dismissed, someone he reduced to a punchline, and now she was the one holding the only thing that could save his daughter. He wasn't used to feeling powerless, but right now he was. And the woman he once mocked, she was walking straight towards something he couldn't reach. Grace. The donation room was colder than Zahara expected. The walls were a soft, neutral beige, meant to feel calming, but everything still smelled faintly of antiseptic and tension. A nurse led her to one of the reclining chairs, asked her to sit, and handed her a clipboard. "Just a few quick questions before we begin," the nurse said kindly. "Routine stuff, allergies, medications, health history, that sort of thing." Zahara nodded and took the clipboard. Her hands were steady, even though her heart felt heavy. She could still feel Callum's eyes on her from the hallway, and still hear the hesitation in his voice and the shame he didn't quite know how to say out loud. But none of that mattered right now. There was a child who needed help, a child who might not see the end of the night without it, and Zahara had what she needed. She filled out the paperwork quickly and handed it back. The nurse scanned it and smiled. "Everything looks good. Blood pressure's perfect. Iron levels are strong. You're clear to donate." "How much do you need?" Zahara asked, her voice calm. The nurse hesitated for half a second, then said carefully, "Normally, we take 1 unit, but in this case, we need 2. Zahara blinked. 2? Is that safe? For most people, not really, but based on your numbers, it's possible. We'll monitor you closely. There's still risk, lightheadedness, nausea, fatigue, maybe even fainting. It'll take longer. You'll need to rest afterward, but it could save her life." Zahara nodded once. "Do it." "You don't have to decide so quickly," the nurse said gently. "You can take a moment." "I don't need a moment," Zahara said, meeting her eyes. "If it were my daughter in there, I'd want someone to do the same." The nurse paused, then nodded. "We'll prep you now." She moved efficiently, setting up the equipment and inserting the needle with practiced care. Zahara leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes as the first drops of blood began to fill the bag beside her. In the quiet hum of the room, she focused on her breathing. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. She thought about everything that had led her to this moment. Every time someone underestimated her. Every time she had to earn twice the respect for half the recognition. Every time her name was mispronounced, her intelligence dismissed, her worth measured in tips and assumptions. And yet, here she was, hooked up to a machine, giving part of herself to save the life of a child she didn't know. The irony wasn't lost on her. Neither was the grace of it. Outside the room, a few nurses whispered about her quietly. One of them had overheard the blood bank technician earlier, something about Zahara's blood being textbook clean, a rare combination of antigens, near universal compatibility for pediatric patients, the kind of match you only see once in a blue moon. Inside, Zahara stayed still. She kept her eyes closed. She thought about her mother, about the way she always said kindness was power in disguise, about how pain doesn't have to make you bitter. It can make you better if you let it. The donation process took longer than usual. 2 full units of blood was no small task. Halfway through, Zahara started to feel it. A tightness in her stomach, a lightness in her head. But she didn't complain. She just asked one question. Is it helping? The nurse smiled. Yes, it's exactly what we need. The surgeon's getting ready now. You're giving her a real chance. Zahara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Good. That was all she wanted. Not recognition, not an apology, not even gratitude. Just the knowledge that someone, a little girl, might live to see another morning. Because sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was everything. The bag of blood was barely sealed when a nurse rushed it down the hall in a cooler marked Priority Pediatric Use. Every step echoed through the sterile corridor like a countdown in reverse, this time racing not toward death, but toward the possibility of life. Inside the trauma room, Ariel's condition had worsened. Her blood pressure had dropped again. Her tiny fingers were ice cold. The medical team was on edge, the mood shifting from urgency to panic. Dr. Patel stood at the head of the bed, shouting orders over the noise of beeping monitors. Where is that transfusion? On its way, a nurse called. 30 seconds out. The moment the blood arrived, they moved fast. The line was inserted. The crimson stream flowed from the bag into the child's fragile veins. A monitor beeped louder, then steadier, then, finally, calmer. Ariel's fingers twitched, her eyelids fluttered, and then, for the first time in nearly an hour, the rhythm of the room slowed. Controlled, focused, hopeful. Dr. Patel stepped back, letting out a breath he hadn't dared exhale. She's stabilizing, he said. Vitals are holding. That blood saved her. In the hallway just outside, Callum stood with his hand pressed against the wall, body tense. When the nurse emerged, he spun toward her. She's okay, the nurse said gently. We're not out of the woods yet, but the transfusion worked. The donor gave us exactly what we needed. She bought us time, maybe everything. Callum exhaled shakily, a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. His legs buckled and he sat down hard on the bench. Ariel was going to live. His daughter was still here. Across the hospital, in the donation center, Zahara tried to sit up. Easy, the nurse warned, don't rush. But Zahara was already pale, her body drained. She blinked slowly, as if the light itself were too heavy for her eyes. The double-unit donation had taken more from her than she realized. How's the girl? She asked. The nurse smiled. She's stable. You did it. Zahara let herself lean back, her muscles finally releasing their grip on consciousness. Good, she whispered. And then everything went soft. Her head slumped to the side. Her breathing is shallow. Hey, the nurse said sharply, tapping her arm. Zahara, stay with me. 2 more staff rushed over. A blood pressure cuff was wrapped around her arm. Ice packs were placed under her knees. Juice and glucose tablets were prepared. She's crashing, low sugar, blood volume too low to recover on her own. They moved quickly but carefully. Zahara's pulse was faint but present. Her body wasn't in danger, but it was done. Her system had given all it could. "She's going to be okay," the nurse reassured. "Just needs fluids, time, rest." Meanwhile, word began to spread through the hospital like electricity. Someone had answered the call. A stranger, a young woman, gave double the standard donation. No hesitation, no demand for thanks. Just showed up and gave. By the time Callum asked to meet her, Zahara was already being wheeled to a recovery room. Her cheeks are still pale, her eyes closed, her arms were limp at her sides. He stood outside the doorway, watching her through the glass. The same woman he had laughed at 12 hours earlier, the one whose name he twisted into a joke. And now, here she was, unconscious, recovering from the very act that saved his daughter's life. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. He just stood there, still in his blood-stained shirt, staring at the sleeping woman who had reminded him, in the most brutal and beautiful way, that real strength often comes in silence. That sometimes the most powerful person in the room doesn't raise their voice. They give, and then they fall. When Zahara opened her eyes, the light in the hospital room was soft and golden, filtered through half-closed blinds. For a moment, she wasn't sure where she was. The ceiling above her wasn't familiar. Neither was the soft whir of machines nor the beeping from down the hallway. Then the memory rushed back. The donation, the nurse, the cold chair, the girl. She blinked slowly, her throat dry and her body heavy but alive. It felt like her bones had turned into lead. Her limbs didn't want to move, and her thoughts floated just above the surface of clarity. A nurse stepped in quietly, noticed Zahara staring, and smiled. "Hey there," she said gently. "Welcome back." Zahara tried to speak, but could only manage a whisper. "How long?" "About 4 hours. You fainted, low blood sugar and dehydration, but we've got fluids in you now. You're safe." Zahara nodded slowly, then struggled to lift her head. "The girl, is she okay?" The nurse's smile grew. "She's more than okay. That second bag you gave was exactly what she needed. The surgeon said it turned everything around." Zahara let her head fall back to the pillow, a quiet breath of relief escaping her lips. The nurse touched her arm. "People have been asking about you. Staff, patients, even a few people from the press caught wind of it. They're calling you the angel in sneakers." Zahara chuckled weakly. "That's dramatic." "Maybe," the nurse said, "but not wrong." A few minutes later, another nurse arrived and gently helped Zahara sit up in bed. Her IV stayed in, but they handed her a bottle of water and a small cup of applesauce. The simple gesture felt oddly comforting. Then came the knock on the door. Not one, not two, but a soft, steady rhythm. Zahara turned her head as it opened and was stunned by what she saw. A line of hospital staff began to enter one by one. Doctors, nurses, janitors, admins in scrubs and sneakers and suits. Some held small bouquets of flowers. Others brought handwritten cards. A few carried nothing but the weight of the moment in their eyes. The nurse beside her leaned in. "They wanted to thank you in person." Zahara's mouth parted, caught between confusion and awe. The first to step forward was Dr. Patel. He extended his hand, then realized she was still too weak to shake it. So he gently placed a card on the bedside table instead. "I've seen hundreds of emergencies," he said softly, "but what you did today, that was rare. The kind of rare that changes people." Next came a nurse who had helped during the transfusion. Then the head of pediatrics. Then a janitor, Zahara, who had passed in the hallway earlier, now stood with a shy smile and a small bag of cookies. One by one they spoke. "Thank you for your courage." Your blood saved a child's life. You reminded us why we're here." Zahara's eyes welled up, the gratitude flooding her all at once. Not because she needed the attention, not because she wanted to be seen, but because for once, she was. Not as a server, not as a background figure in someone else's life, not as a name to be mispronounced or a smile to be ignored, but as someone who mattered. One nurse stepped forward holding a simple bouquet of sunflowers, Zahara's favorite. "We didn't know your name earlier," she said, "but we know it now, and we're never forgetting it." At that, Zahara finally let the tears fall. Not from exhaustion, not from pain, but from the deep, quiet recognition that something had shifted. She wasn't just the girl who showed up. She was the girl who gave everything and reminded an entire hospital that miracles don't always wear lab coats. Sometimes they wear sneakers and smile through the weight of the world. 2 days later, Zahara was discharged from the hospital. Her strength had returned slowly, her color gradually blooming back into her cheeks. The nurses hugged her on the way out. One of the janitors slipped her a folded note that simply read, "You reminded us what real courage looks like." At that, Zahara finally let the tears fall. Not from exhaustion, not from pain, but from the deep, quiet recognition that something had shifted. She wasn't just the girl who showed up. She was the girl who gave everything and reminded an entire hospital that miracles don't always wear lab coats. Sometimes they wear sneakers and smile through the weight of the world. 2 days later, Zahara was discharged from the hospital. Her strength had returned slowly, her color gradually blooming back into her cheeks. The nurses hugged her on the way out. One of the janitors slipped her a folded note that simply read, "You reminded us what real courage looks like." Zahara smiled, grateful, but ready to disappear back into the quiet. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted normal again. But normal had changed. Because while she recovered, the story of what she had done, of how a young black waitress gave twice the standard donation of blood to save the life of a billionaire's daughter, spread faster than wildfire. It wasn't supposed to go public, but someone in the hospital, perhaps with good intentions, leaked it to a local journalist. And once it hit the evening news, the internet did the rest. Social media exploded. #ThankYouZahara trended for 2 days straight. Think pieces were written. TV anchors called it the quiet hero story of the year. And through it all, Zahara said nothing. She returned home, helped her mother sort mail, and made soup like any other Tuesday. Until the knock came. She opened the door to find a woman in a navy blue pantsuit standing on her porch, sunglasses in hand, hair perfectly styled. 2 men flanked her, bodyguards clearly. The woman didn't smile at first, but Zahara recognized her instantly. Marian Fields, PR director for Renshaw Global. "I work for Mr. Renshaw," Marianne began. "He would like to issue a public statement, and he's requesting your presence at the press conference." Zahara narrowed her eyes. "Why?" "Because he owes you something he should have given you that day at the restaurant, and he wants the world to hear it." Zahara leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I didn't do this for a headline." "We know," Marianne said. "That's exactly why he wants to get it right." She paused, then added, "You don't have to say anything. Just stand next to him. Let him say what he needs to say." Zahara considered, then nodded once. "I'll think about it." 2 days later, the lobby of Renshaw Global was packed with cameras, journalists, staff, and live streamers. The company had called a press conference, but no one expected the CEO himself to take the podium, let alone with her beside him. Zahara stood quietly just off to the side, her hair down, wearing a simple navy blouse and dark jeans. She didn't want a dress. She didn't want to be styled. She wanted to be seen as she was. Callum walked to the microphone slowly, not in his usual swaggering stride. This time, he walked like a man carrying something heavy. He cleared his throat. 2 weeks ago, I made a joke at a restaurant. About a name I didn't understand. A name I didn't even try to pronounce with respect. He glanced at Zahara. Her name was Zahara, and I mocked it. I mocked her because I thought in that moment that I mattered more. The room was silent. 3 hours after that moment, my daughter was dying. She needed a rare blood type, and no one could help her. He paused, voice cracking. No one except Zahara. A few murmurs moved through the crowd. She gave more than anyone should have asked, and she asked for nothing in return. Not recognition, not a reward, not even acknowledgement. He looked back at her again. I gave her disrespect. She gave me my daughter's life. Zahara's throat tightened, but she held her expression steady. I am here today not just to thank her, but to apologize. Publicly, personally, fully. Not just for what I said, but for what I represented. He turned to face her. I'm sorry, Zahara. I see you now. I should have seen you then. And I promise, my company, my name, and my influence, from this moment on, will stand for something better than the man you met that morning. She didn't move, not at first. Then she stepped forward, just a little, just enough, and she held out her hand. The flash of cameras lit up the room, but Zahara didn't see them. All she saw was a man trying, truly trying, to make it right. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. After the press conference, the crowd began to scatter. Reporters shouted last-minute questions, photographers scrambled for better angles, and staffers rushed to manage the social media frenzy already exploding online. But Zahara stood still. Callum Renshaw had offered the world a public apology. It was honest, it was necessary, and it took more humility than most men in his position were ever willing to show. Still, she wasn't swayed by applause. As the cameras turned elsewhere, Callum stepped toward her, his expression uncertain. "Can we talk?" he asked. Zahara nodded slowly. "Somewhere without microphones?" He gave a half smile and gestured toward the elevators. "There's a quiet space upstairs. No press, just people." She followed him into a sleek, glass-paneled room overlooking the city skyline. The door shut behind them with a soft click. A tray of untouched pastries sat on the side table, likely set out for the executives who never came. Callum poured them both water, then handed her a glass. "I know you didn't come here for a thank you," he said, "but I'd still like to do more than just speak." He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. "This is a check, a real one, no strings. It's a personal thank you for what you did, for Ariel." Zahara took it slowly, opened it, then blinked. She didn't say the number out loud, but her face said enough. It was life-changing, for most people. And yet, she placed it back on the table. "I'm not taking that." Callum's eyebrows lifted. "It's not hush money, I swear. There's no NDA, no favor owed, just gratitude." Zahara looked him dead in the eye. "I know," she said, "and that's the problem." He didn't understand, so she explained. "If I take this, you get to feel better. You get to sleep at night thinking you made it right. But that little girl out there, Ariel, she gets to live in a world where her father tried to buy redemption instead of building it." Callum's face tightened. "I'm not punishing you," she continued, "but I'm not here to be bought off either." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "So what do you want?" Zahara didn't hesitate. "I want a seat at the table." His eyes narrowed, confused. "I want in on the decisions, not just some one-time donation to charity, not a photo op. I want a real role, a voice, on whatever you're building next." Callum sat down slowly, surprised. "You want a job?" "I want influence," she said. "Because if I had to bleed to save your daughter, then the least you can do is let me help create a world where no other little girl needs a miracle to make it to morning." He leaned back, studied her. "You have no background in corporate governance, no resume that fits this world." Zahara shrugged. "I didn't have the right look to serve your table either, and yet, here we are." He laughed quietly. "Okay," he said, "you'll consult on our new community equity initiative. Full voice, full vote. Salary, benefits, the works. You choose the title." Zahara smiled, just slightly. "Don't need a title, just space to speak." Callum offered his hand. This time, she took it. Firm, clear, equal. No cameras, no lights. Just a woman who refused to be silenced, and a man who finally learned how to listen. It began with a name. Zahara didn't want it to be about her. She wasn't interested in legacy or spotlight. She wanted impact, real, measurable change. So when Callum asked what the program should be called, she answered without hesitation: Equality Grant. No frills, no fluff, just a promise in 2 words. Over the next 6 weeks, Zahara worked directly with Callum's executive team. It was awkward at first. Some board members treated her like a novelty, others like a threat. She didn't care. She showed up with spreadsheets, community research, and lived experience that none of them had. She didn't just talk about inequality, she could map it out by zip code. She didn't just mention barriers, she had climbed over them, barefoot. Callum, to his credit, didn't flinch. He listened, he asked questions, he made space, and more importantly, he backed her publicly. The first draft of the Equality Grant Initiative included emergency healthcare stipends for single parents, paid internships for students from underrepresented neighborhoods, a mentorship network connecting young workers with executives across industries, a full tuition scholarship fund for service workers seeking higher education. But Zahara pushed further. "It's not enough to offer access," she told the board. "You have to make people feel they belong once they walk through the door." So they added cultural training for leadership, revised their hiring process, and, most controversially, they committed to publishing internal salary transparency reports every year. It wasn't just charity, it was accountability. The media took notice. Headlines popped up. Renshaw Global launches $25 million equality grant under guidance of Waitress turned consultant. From blood donor to boardroom, Zahara Blythe shakes up corporate culture. Zahara didn't grant interviews, she let the work speak. But when the launch event finally arrived, she agreed to say a few words. It wasn't on a stage, it wasn't in a ball gown, it was in the same lobby where she'd once been told to smile more while carrying a tray of someone else's lunch. She stood behind a simple microphone. The crowd in front of her was a mix of press, employees, students, parents, and community leaders. "I was never supposed to be standing here," she began. "Not because I wasn't capable, but because no one ever expected someone like me to belong in rooms like this." She paused, scanning the crowd. "I served coffee to men who never learned my name. I got passed over for jobs I was overqualified for. I walked into places where my skin, my voice, or my background was the first thing noticed, and the last thing respected." She let the silence settle. "But I also walked into a hospital one day and chose to give. Not because I had to, not for attention, just because a child needed help." More silence. And then, equality doesn't begin with money. It begins with recognition, with giving people a chance to be more than what the world expects of them. She stepped back. No tears, no drama, just truth. Callum followed her at the podium, announcing the fund, the partnerships, and the schools and organizations already lined up to participate. The applause was loud, earned. But Zahara didn't soak it in. She slipped out quietly afterward, into the side hallway, unnoticed. She walked past a janitor, nodded to him. He nodded back. Respect, mutual and wordless. 2 people who knew what it meant to be overlooked, and to rise anyway. The Equality Grant wasn't a fix for everything, but it was a start. And Zahara had learned something else. Sometimes, the most radical form of power is simply choosing not to disappear. It started with a thank you card, handwritten with glitter and stickers on the front. Ariel had insisted on it herself, even though her little finger still shook from time to time. She wrote every letter carefully, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth in concentration, her blonde curls falling into her eyes as she worked. "Dear Zahara," it began, "thank you for saving my life. I hope we can be friends." Inside the envelope was also a drawing, stick figures of two girls holding hands in front of a giant red heart. One of them had long, curly black hair and big eyes. The other had freckles and a bright yellow bow. Zahara got the card 2 days after the Equality Grant launch. She smiled so hard it hurt. But it didn't stop there. Ariel asked to meet her again, properly this time. "Not in a hospital bed," she told her dad. "I want to say thank you like a big girl." Callum arranged a casual lunch. No media, no fancy event, just two families meeting at a local cafe in the park. Zahara showed up with her younger brother Miles, who was skeptical at first, until Ariel challenged him to a game of Uno and wiped the floor with him. From there, something gentle bloomed. They started meeting once a month. Sometimes it was dinner at Zahara's place. Her mom's spicy chicken stew always left Callum sweating but smiling. Other times it was weekend walks, or baking cookies in Zahara's small kitchen, or movie nights at the Renshaw penthouse, where Ariel and Miles built blanket forts on the hardwood floors. At first, it was awkward. The class difference, the history, the way their worlds had collided under the worst and best of circumstances. But kids don't care about any of that. And eventually, the adults didn't either. Zahara's mom got used to teasing Callum. "You billionaires don't know how to season chicken," she once said, making him laugh until he choked. Callum, in turn, started treating Zahara less like a symbol and more like what she really was, a friend, a voice of reason, an equal. He stopped trying to overcompensate, stopped offering money, favors, and opportunities. Instead, he asked questions, listened, showed up. And Zahara, she let her guard down. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to laugh at his dad jokes. Enough to accept his invitation to Ariel's birthday party, where she gifted the girl a bracelet with their initials and watched Ariel wear it like a badge of honor. Their friendship didn't erase the past. It didn't undo what happened in that restaurant, but it built something new, something honest, something earned. One Saturday afternoon, the four of them, Zahara, Callum, Ariel, and Miles, stood in a community garden that Zahara had helped fund through the Equality Grant. They were planting vegetables together, laughing about how bad Ariel was at keeping her shoes clean, when Miles asked a question. "So, are we like family now?" Ariel looked up from her muddy hands. "Duh," she said. "Obviously." Zahara met Callum's eyes, and they both smiled. Because somehow, after blood, pain, and redemption, what remained wasn't guilt or shame or debt. It was something far simpler, a bond, built not on perfection, but on choice. Two families, one friendship, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the most miraculous relationships are the ones nobody planned for. Years later, people still talked about the woman who gave her blood to save a billionaire's daughter. The headlines faded, but the impact didn't. The Equality Grant grew, reaching new cities, new schools, and new families. Single parents found relief. Young students got their shot. Conversations around dignity, equity, and second chances became more than boardroom buzzwords. And Zahara, she stayed herself. She still wore sneakers. She still loved bookstores and black coffee and her mom's cornbread. But now, when she walked into a room, people didn't just see a former waitress. They saw a voice that mattered, a force, a reminder. Callum continued to lead with more humility than he ever thought possible. He listened more, learned more, and he never again underestimated quiet strength. But life, as it does, moved on. The girls grew up. The boardrooms changed. The news cycle rotated. And yet, the story remained. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Because it asks a question that lingers in the hearts of those who hear it. What would you do if no one else stepped up? Would you walk away? Or would you sit in a cold hospital room, roll up your sleeve, and give without needing anything in return. See, the true lesson in this story isn't about wealth or race or power. It's about choice. It's about what we choose to do when we think no one is watching. It's about what we choose to believe when the world tells us our name is strange, our background is less, and our voice is small. It's about choosing to stay kind when you've been dismissed, choosing to forgive without forgetting, choosing to rise without asking for applause. Zahara chose all of that. She chose to love without knowing the outcome, to give without keeping score, to stand her ground without becoming bitter. And in doing so, she changed more than one life. She changed a system. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. You don't need a title to lead. You don't need permission to matter. And you don't need a stage to be seen. Sometimes the world will try to define you by your worst moment, but you get to decide what comes next. Zahara did, and now it's your turn. If this story moved you, even just a little, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, talk about it, pass it on to someone who needs to believe that their kindness still counts. And maybe, just maybe, when their moment comes, they'll remember this one. They'll remember her, and they'll choose to give. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story.